how to have uncomfortable conversations. We don't teach students how to have uncomfortable conversations. You tell me which is going to be more valuable for the rest of your life. How to have a difficult conversation or trigonometry.
Described as a visionary thinker with a rare intellect.
Multiple-time best-selling author,
Sinek.
Every single one of us knows what we do. Some of us know how we do it, but very, very few of us can clearly articulate why we do what we do. And I think one of the reasons most of us don't know who we are is because we're making decisions that are inconsistent with that true cause, with that why. There's a great irony in all of this. I had what a lot of people would be considered a good life, and yet didn't want to wake up and go to work anymore.
Why?
We cannot do this thing called career or life alone. We're just not that smart, we're not that strong, we're just not that good. For anyone who wants to be a better version of themselves, purpose comes from... It's one of the best podcasts I've ever done.
Simon, my introduction to you was this book, Start With Why, and it hung on the walls of some of my offices around the world for a long time. And then my employees would come in after reading the book and evangelize about it, and it would come up in meetings and in discussions and in creative brainstorms, etc., over and over and over again. The question I wanted to ask you was there a point in your life where you'd felt like you drifted so far from your why that you realized the importance of it for the first time?
Well, the simple answer is yes. It was that drifting that set me on the path to find it in the first place, to even articulate that idea. I had what a lot of people would be considered sort of a good life. I was living the proverbial American dream. You know, I quit my job to start my own business. The business was doing okay, made an okay living, had great clients, did good work. And yet I'd lost my passion for that and didn't want to wake up and go to work anymore, which was embarrassing because superficially everything was just fine. I was pretending that I was happier, more in control, and more successful than I was or felt, which is quite frankly pretty draining and pretty dark. And it wasn't until a very, very close friend of mine came to me and said, something's wrong. She was the first one to notice something. And I came clean and I sort of let it all out. And it was that catharsis that sort of lifted this heavy weight off my shoulders. I was no longer alone. It was no longer a secret. And all of the energy that was previously going into lying, hiding, and faking now went into finding a solution. There was a confluence of events. It's not, all of these histories are perfectly neat and clean, and that's not really how it is or was. But to compress it and oversimplify it, I made this discovery based on the biology of human decision-making that every single one of us knows what we do. Some of us know how we do it, but very, very few of us can clearly articulate why we do what we do. And I realized that was what I was missing. So to answer your question, yes, 100%. The realization of the why was my loss of it. And I realized I knew what I did and I was good at it. I knew how I was different or special or stood out from the crowd. And that was my differentiating value proposition. And I was articulate about it. But I couldn't tell you why I was waking out of bed every day to do it, and I would give some nonsense entrepreneur answer because I want to be my own boss. I'm like, yeah, sure. But that's not a reason to get out of bed every day.
This got me thinking a lot about the guests that I have sit here and also my own story where sometimes I think people's why or the thing that's been driving them is in fact some kind of trauma or insecurity. I think because you sit here with people in there, whether it's Israel Adesanya, the UFC champion, who's the current maybe world's best UFC fighter. He was battered and bullied as a kid, being the only black kid in his school in New Zealand. And so it's no coincidence that he strived to be this fighter. And in fact, when he won the UFC title the next day, he was depressed and he went to therapy. That's made me question whether our whys can sometimes be trauma or insecurity driven as opposed to being intentional and I don't know.
So a why is fully formed by the time we're in our mid to late teens. The youngest person I've done a why discovery for was 16, and it worked. The process worked. And what I've learned from just doing hundreds of these over the years is that a why is always positive. It's always striving for something. So we're not inspired against something. We're not inspired to stop something. We're inspired to build something or create something or advance something. Though it may have been born out of trauma, there's usually a silver lining that gives us that cause, especially trauma that happens in the middle of our lives. September 11th is often looked to as, people found purpose. We are who we are. Like I said, we're fully formed by the experiences we have when we're young, at a pretty young age. And now the opportunity life presents us is to make decisions that either keeps us in balance with who we really are or not. And I think one of the reasons most of us feel discomfort or don't feel ourselves or don't know who we are is because we're making decisions that are inconsistent with that true cause, with that why. So you raise the case of individual athletes who become champions and then suffer depression. It's a fairly common story. You hear this from Olympians. Michael Phelps becomes the most medaled, Olympian of all time, immediately suffers depression. Andre Agassi becomes the most storied, tennis player of all time, immediately becomes depressed. And what I've learned from talking to some of these particularly athletes, but I think it happens in the business world as well, which is from a very young age, they set themselves a goal that, in my words, would be a very selfish goal. I want to be the best at X, the best tennis player, the best golfer, the best whatever. And, the way Olympians put it, which I get a kick out of, is I want to win the Olympics. I'm like, well, no one wins the Olympics. Like, you can be a winner in your sport, but that's an aside. But, and their entire lives from pretty young ages, every decision they're making is to help them advance this finite goal. And all of their relationships are, can you help me achieve my goal, right? And if you can no longer help me achieve my goal, I don't need you anymore as a coach or even a friend. And there's huge sacrifices, missing of birthdays, missing of Christmases, missing of major life events, because I have to practice so I can achieve my goal. And when they get interviewed on the news, or at the Olympics or whatever, why do you do it? And they'll say, well, I'm doing it to inspire the little kids, which is complete bullshit. If you look at all of their vision boards from when they were younger, of pictures of podiums and medals and money and Lamborghinis, not a single little child on there of the people you're doing it for. It's just a lucky strike extra. I mean, absolutely, you do inspire children, but that's not the reason you did it. You just got that, like I said, it's a twofer. And then when they achieve or don't achieve this thing and then can no longer compete for it, they've set their entire path in all their relationships on these finite selfish goals. And so when it's complete, they realize they don't really have a lot of friends around them. They don't really have a lot of close relationships. They don't really even have a sense of purpose, because they've been spent the past 20 years or so with one purpose, which was this finite goal, which now has run out. And so they're very purposeless. And I see this in Broadway performers who set their whole life to be on the West End or be on Broadway. Every class, every tap dancing class, every singing class, they make it, they get there, and then depression, or at least malaise. Or senior executive, same thing. If I just make $1 million, if I just become a millionaire, then I'll feel. And the problem with all of those things is, as I said before, they are selfish. It is your goal for your reasons, which is not fulfilling for any social animal, for any human being. Our sense of joy and fulfillment and love and purpose comes from our ability to serve another human being. Have a child, tell me how your life changes. Fall in love, tell me how your life changes. Think about all the stupid things, irrational things we've done for love. We get on planes and travel around the world just to say, I love you. We do ridiculous things, and it all feels worth it. And the sacrifices we make for a child all feel worth it, but these are no longer for us, and these things will live on beyond our own lives. They are not finite, they are infinite. And there's nothing wrong with personal achievement, there's nothing wrong with setting goals, but it has to be in the context of something even bigger. In general, team sports don't suffer this because you had to do it together. It's usually individual athletes who suffer this more often. And so there's one of the athletes I would point to is a guy by the name of Curtis Martin. Curtis is a Hall of Fame NFL footballer. And he only started playing football basically to stay out of trouble. He did it as a favor to his mom, just so he wouldn't get into, he grew up in a really bad neighborhood in Philadelphia. It basically kept him out of trouble. And it turns out he was really good at it. And when he realized he was good at it, he realized that by being good at something, it will give him the power to actually give back later. And he made this realization, especially when he went to college on scholarship and then made it to the NFL. He realized the better he was at the sport, it wasn't about propelling his own career. It was about when he leaves this career, he has a platform that will be bigger than the platform he has now. And so he was driven and driven and driven, not so that he could be the best, not that so that he could make the most money. In fact, he made a lot less money than a lot of other players of his rank. Not that he could be rich or famous or any of these things. He did it so that he could build his platform so that he could give back later. So when he retired from the NFL, he wasn't lost. He wasn't searching. He knew exactly what the next step was, because being an elite athlete to the highest level possible was only step one. And to see one's life as a continuum rather than an event is much healthier.